It begins with a silence. Not the quiet of peace, but a silence so thick it presses against the ribs, making the breath slow and certain. It was the silence that fell on the town of Ashgrove, Tennessee, in the winter of 1899, when 12 children stepped into the little wooden chapel of St. Augustine's and never returned. Some called it a tragedy, others a judgment, but the oldest among them, those who refused to speak unless the lamps were low, whispered of something far worse. Imagine it. 12 voices, young and bright, gathering under a wooden roof that creaked with every wind. Their laughter had once spilled into the snow outside. Their shoes, small and worn, left prints in the mud leading up to the chapel door. But by nightfall, those same prints ended at the threshold. Beyond it, nothing. No screams, no flight, no explanation. The official records, if you trust them, claim that all 12 children returned home in safety. One line, no more, in a parish ledger that has since yellowed with age. But the families, the mothers who tore their throats raw with crying, the fathers who lit lanterns and scarred the hills, told a different tale. They said the children never came home. They said the chapel swallowed them. And if you stand near those ruins today, where only stones and twisted beams remain, you may still hear them. Faint at first, the sound of voices, singing a hymn no parish remembers. So I ask you, what truly happened in the year 1899, in the shadow of that chapel? Why were the cries of 12 children erased from memory, their names scratched from record? And more importantly, why does no one dare to speak of it now? They never told me this in school. Did they ever tell you? History spares us the stories that trouble the conscience too deeply, the ones that suggest something unnatural may rest just beneath the soil. But stories like this, buried forbidden, always find their way back. And tonight, you and I will walk into that silence together. Stay with me, subscribe if you dare, for what follows is no ordinary tale of the past. It is a open, still bleeding. That night in 1899 begins here, at the chapel of St. Augustine's. The air was brittle with frost, the moon a thin white blade in the sky. Oil lamps flickered along the path as children filed in, their mittens clutched to their chests, their breath rising in pale clouds. Their voices, 12 in all, chattered like sparrows. But none would be heard again outside those walls. The year was ending. Frost clung to the timbers of barns, and the hills of rural Tennessee lay silent beneath a gray sky. The town of Ashgrove had always been a quiet place. Too quiet, some said, as though it had been forgotten by time itself. Its people were poor but God-fearing, their lives bound to the rhythm of church bells and the stubborn soil that refused to yield enough to feed them. At the edge of town stood the chapel of St. Augustine's, a crooked little building of pine and oak, built by hands that had long since returned to dust. The chapel was no grand cathedral. Its steeple leaned, its paint had peeled, and its floorboards groaned with every step. But to the children of Ashgrove, it was a place of gathering, a place where winter hymns might chase away the hunger that gnawed at their bellies. It was here, on a frigid evening in December of 1899, that 12 children entered the chapel for evening prayers. They were seen by many townsfolk walking home from the mill, mothers carrying baskets of coal, and even the parish priest, Father Wilkes, who rang the chapel bell himself to summon them. 12 children passed through the chapel doors. But by morning, not a single one had returned. At first, no one panicked. Children lingered. Children slept at cousins' houses or snuck away to play in the fields. But by dawn, when the mothers of Ashgrove went door to door searching for them, the truth became unavoidable. The doors of the chapel were locked. The windows were shuttered. And when they were forced open, by hammers, by axes, by desperate hands, there was nothing inside but silence. No overturned benches, no scattered clothes, no sign that 12 living souls had ever stepped inside. If you search the parish records today, you will find only a single line in the ledger, December 14th, 1899. Children attended evening hymn, returned home safely. No names, no details, no mention of the night that 12 families wept until their voices failed. So tell me, who wrote that line? And why does the paper lie when every living witness told another story entirely? Some said it was God's will, a punishment for hidden sins. Others whispered of darker forces that had lingered in those hills since before the church was built. But I will tell you what I believe history does not erase by accident. When children vanish and their absence is sealed away in silence, it is because someone, somewhere wanted it that way. The chapel still stands, though it is no more than a ruin now. Its roof collapsed decades ago, its walls broken by vines and moss. Travelers who pass through Ashgrove claim they feel watched as they near it. Some hear a sound they cannot explain, like the faintest echo of children's voices singing a hymn that no living parish remembers. Do you hear it? Listen closely, because once you notice the sound, it does not leave you. But let us begin not with the ruins, nor with the silence that blankets them, but with the children themselves. Their names are rarely spoken, for even in the old town records they are absent. But I have uncovered fragments, scraps from diaries, yellowed clippings from forgotten newspapers, half-burned letters tucked in the corners of family Bibles. From these scraps, I can give you a glimpse of who they were. Sarah Collins, age 8, who carried a blue ribbon in her hair. Thomas Reeves, age 11, who worked the mill's wheel when his father's hands gave out. Little May, only 5, who followed her brother everywhere and hummed the same lullaby her mother once sang. And 9 more besides, each with a story cut short. These children were not nameless. They lived, they laughed, they walked the muddy paths of Ashgrove, and one December night, they entered a chapel that promised safety, only to be taken by something the town never dared describe. So I ask you before we go further, what could lock 12 children inside a house of God and leave behind no trace? A fire would have scarred the walls. A storm would have left debris. Even human cruelty leaves its stains. But here, there was nothing. Only silence. Only absence. And that perhaps is the most terrifying thing of all. Ashgrove does not speak of it. Its people avert their eyes when the chapel is mentioned. Outsiders are not told the story, save in whispers meant to frighten children. But the silence itself is a story. A silence that has lasted more than a century. And you, yes, you, are now part of it. You cannot unhear what you've been told. You cannot unsee the chapel door closing behind 12 children who never returned. So stay. Walk with me deeper into the year 1899, because the night they vanished was only the beginning. The night they vanished began quietly, as all tragedies often do. The people of Ashgrove had gathered what little food they had for supper. Cornbread hard as stone, boiled beans, a scrap of salt pork, if fortune smiled. The chapel bell still rang in their ears, and many felt comforted that their sons and daughters were at prayer, watched by the familiar figure of Father Wilkes. The priest, a tall man with hollow cheeks, was last seen walking away from the chapel around dusk. He swore later, before the sheriff himself, that the children were inside when he departed. They were singing, he said, clear as angels. I left them to finish their hymn. No one questioned him at first. Why would they? The chapel had always been a place of safety. By 9 o'clock, the town was wrapped in darkness. The oil lamps flickered in windows, smoke drifted from chimneys, and the bitter December wind pressed itself against every door. Mothers called their children's names into the lanes. Fathers waited by their thresholds, lanterns held high. One by one, the families of Ashgrove realized the same grim truth: no child had returned. At the Reeves house, Mrs. Reeves dropped her sewing needle into the floorboards when she saw her son's bed empty. At the Collins home, Sarah's blue ribbon still lay on the dresser, but her pillow was cold. At the Carters, little May's doll sat propped against the wall, as if waiting for her small hands. The silence of those rooms would haunt Ashgrove forever. At first there was denial. Perhaps they are playing games, one father muttered, though his lips trembled. Another suggested they had gone to the mill to seek warmth. A third claimed perhaps Father Wilkes had taken them on a walk to teach them a lesson about obedience. But as the hours stretched past midnight, denial crumbled. One mother collapsed into the snow, clawing at it with bare hands, screaming her child's name. Another banged her fists against the chapel doors, shouting for them to be opened. When finally the lock was broken, the chapel yawned back at them, empty, silent, undisturbed. Every candle had burned low. Every hymn book lay neatly stacked. And the air smelled not of smoke, nor sweat, nor blood, only of cold pine and dust. Word spread quickly. Men with rifles and lanterns scoured the hills, their boots crunching against the frozen ground. They searched the mill, the riverbanks, the barns, and the black woods beyond. Their voices carried through the night, echoing off the trees. "Sarah! Thomas! May!" No reply. By dawn, their lantern oil was gone. Their throats were raw, and every trail led only back to the chapel, standing crooked against the grey sky, as though it were mocking them. It was then that whispers began. Some said the children had run away together, though to where, no one could say. Others insisted Father Wilkes had spirited them off, perhaps to another parish. A few, those who remembered older stories about the land itself, spoke only in hushed tones. "It's the hill has taken them." When pressed, they said no more. What I want you to see is this: the town's terror was not immediate, but creeping. It came not in a scream, but in a slow, choking realization. One by one, the families admitted what none wanted to believe: 12 children had walked into a house of God and never come home. And the strangest thing of all, the priest did not return to the chapel that night. He was seen instead in his study, shutters drawn, quill scratching furiously against the pages of his ledger. When neighbors begged him to help search, he closed the door with shaking hands. What did he know? What was he writing? And why, when the sheriff examined the ledger days later, was the night's entry a single chilling lie? The sun rose over Ash Grove on December 15th, but it did not bring comfort. It brought only the weight of absence, the weight of beds still empty, hearth still cold, names that would never again be called at morning. And in that pale light, the chapel seemed to lean further, as though bowing under a burden no one dared name. The second night was worse than the first. Ash Grove had no lawman beyond Sheriff Clay, a wary man who carried a revolver but preferred his pipe. He was used to small quarrels, stolen hens, drunken fights at the mill, not the vanishing of 12 souls. By the evening of December 15th, the town pressed him for answers, but he had none. His face grew grey with exhaustion, and his only reply was a muttered, "Children don't vanish into thin air." Yet vanish they had. The mothers gathered at the chapel gates again, shawls pulled tight against the frost. They lit lanterns and candles, planting them in the snow as though they could summon their children back with light. Some sang hymns in trembling voices. Others screamed accusations, at Father Wilkes, at the sheriff, at one another. By midnight, hysteria spread like a fever. A rumor passed from lip to lip: someone had seen footprints in the snow behind the chapel. 12 pairs of small prints, leading not outward but inward, toward the door that had been locked. Yet when the snow was examined, nothing remained, only wind-scattered drifts. Another claimed they had seen shadows moving inside the shuttered windows long after the children were gone. They were singing, the witness swore, "I swear it." I heard the hymn of the dead. Father Wilkes gave no sermon that night. He barred his doors, refusing even the sheriff's call. But a handful of men, suspicious and half-mad with grief, forced their way into his rectory. They found him hunched over his ledger, scratching the same phrase again and again across its pages: "Returned home safely." Dozens of times, hundreds perhaps, a wall of denial written in ink. When they seized the book from him, he screamed, not words, but an animal sound, raw and guttural. The men left him trembling in his chair, eyes rolled white as if he had glimpsed something the others could not. No one spoke of it after. Meanwhile, the chapel itself seemed to change. The children who had once played in its yard would not go near it. Horses balked when led down the lane, and those who dared enter the empty building described a weight upon their chests, as though the very air resisted their lungs. A mill hand named Cyrus told of stepping inside with a lantern. He swore the light dimmed, though his oil was fresh. He swore the walls seemed longer than before, the aisle stretched into shadow, and the hymn books whispered when touched. The sheriff dismissed it as nerves. But Cyrus left town 2 weeks later, never to return. By now, Ashgrove's people turned against one another. Some demanded the priest's arrest. Others accused the sheriff of drunken negligence. A few muttered about the Collins family, claiming Sarah had been marked from birth. But beneath all the quarrels lay the same, unspoken terror. Perhaps the children were not lost in the hills at all. Perhaps they had been taken by the chapel itself. One old woman, Ruth Marbury, gave voice to it. She was nearly blind, her face a map of lines, her words brittle as ash. She told the townsfolk what they already feared but dared not admit. That land was never clean, she rasped. They built the chapel on cursed soil. There were bones in that ground long before your children's feet ever touched it. Her words spread, and though many scoffed, not one parent slept that night. Doors were bolted, candles burned till dawn, and the hills seemed alive with whispers. And through it all, the chapel stood, quiet and unchanged. Its steeple tilted, its shutters closed, its doors barred once more. A hollow shell of wood and shadow. Yet to those who dared walk close, there was no mistaking the sound faint far away, but real, the murmur of children's voices. Singing. Sheriff Clay wrote his first report on the morning of December 16, 1899. The words remain, brittle with age, in the county archives. A search was conducted from dusk till dawn. No sign of foul play discovered. Children presumed to have left chapel after evening hymn. Families hysterical, unreliable in testimony. It was the kind of note a man writes when he does not want trouble to spread beyond his borders. He sent no telegrams to Nashville, no word to neighboring counties. Ashgrove's children were not to be spoken of beyond Ashgrove, yet the townsfolk knew otherwise. They had seen the locked doors. They had heard the silence. They had broken into God's house themselves and found it empty as a tomb. The sheriff's report was not a record. It was a dismissal, and in that gap between what was written and what was lived, terror bred. On the third night, the people of Ashgrove gathered before the chapel itself. Mothers, fathers, siblings. They carried lanterns, torches, even rifles. They said they would not leave until the truth revealed itself. So they kept vigil. The wind cut through them. The frost burned their lungs. Some prayed, some cursed, others simply stared at the wooden doors as though expecting them to swing open. At midnight, one father swore he saw a flicker of movement through the cracks in the shutters. A pale face, childlike watching. He shouted and ran forward, only to collapse in the snow. When the others lifted him, his eyes stared blank and no breath stirred his lips. The first death not of violence nor illness, but of terror. The body was buried quickly without ceremony. After that, the vigil broke. One by one, families returned to their homes, their courage exhausted. But none slept. Every door was bolted, every window covered, as if wood and glass could keep out what lingered in the chapel. Father Wilkes did not emerge. He was said to be in prayer, though no prayers were heard. Once, a neighbor claimed to hear him weeping through the rectory shutters, not the sob of a man, but the high, keening wail of something lost. No one approached again. By the week's end, Ashgrove was no longer a town of neighbors but of suspects. Eyes narrowed over fences. Whispers curled in taverns. A few began packing wagons, muttering that the hills had claimed the children, and they would not wait for it to claim them too. But most remained. What else could they do? Land bound them? Poverty bound them? And grief bound them most of all, so they endured, and the chapel endured with them. I tell you this, when a town loses 12 children at once, it does not recover. The names may be lost from the record, but the silence grows thicker with every year. The soil drinks it, the trees lean into it. And the chapel, yes, the chapel, holds it most of all like a well that never runs dry. It is there still, if you know where to look. Travelers swear they can find it by following the sound, not of bells, for its steeple is long collapsed, but of voices, thin, reedy, childlike voices that weave through the wind. And if you dare step closer, some say you will feel a hand slip into yours. Small, cold, waiting. By the fourth night, Ashgrove no longer believed in rescue. They believed only in remembrance. A group of fathers met in the tavern, their faces pale in lamplight, and decided that if the children were gone, their names must not be lost. So scraps of paper were brought, quills dipped, and trembling hands wrote down what they could recall: Sarah Collins, Thomas Reeves, little May Carter, 10 others, some clear, some only half remembered. For memory falters when fear presses upon it. They placed the list upon the sheriff's desk, demanding it be entered into the county record. He nodded solemn and promised, but the names were never written there. When the papers were sought in later years, only blank pages remained. Blank, or a single sentence scrawled in that same measured hand: December 14, 1899, children attended evening hymn, returned home safely. That phrase again, repeated like a curse. The night after, Father Wilkes vanished. His rectory stood empty, bed unslept in, fire cold. No one saw him leave, though a neighbor swore she heard footsteps long past midnight, the dragging shuffle of boots across frozen ground. Some say he fled into the hills. Some say he joined the children. Others whisper he never left at all, but remains inside the chapel, bound by something stronger than flesh. No body was ever found. The chapel doors were sealed after that, nailed shut by trembling hands. No bells rang again. No sermons were given, no child ever crossed its threshold. Yet even in silence the place breathed. Villagers passing by claimed they heard voices within. Sometimes laughter, sometimes sobbing, sometimes the faint swell of a hymn. And once a farmer swore he saw light flickering behind the shutters, though the building was dark as a tomb. The farmer left town within the month. He did not return. Ashgrove dwindled over the years. Families moved away, fields went fallow, the mill fell silent. But the chapel endured, a ruin leaning upon the hillside, stubborn against time. Travelers who stumble upon it today speak of the same unease. Some swear they hear their own name whispered as they pass. Perhaps it is imagination. Perhaps it is memory itself refusing to be buried. But if you linger too long, if you dare to touch the warped wood of its doors, you may find something waiting on the other side, something that never left. So ask yourself what happened on that December night of 1899. Did 12 children slip into the woods, leaving no tracks, no cries? Did a priest lose his mind and bury his guilt beneath ink and lies? Or did the chapel itself, built on ground too old and too stained to hold innocence, swallow them whole? We cannot say. All we have is a silence that refuses to die, a silence that seeps from the timbers, through the fields, and into the very earth of Tennessee. And all we know for certain is this: 12 children entered the chapel, and not one ever left. The year was 1899, and Tennessee stood at the edge of a new century. Rail lines crept across the hills, bringing freight letters and whispers from cities far away. Cotton wagons still rattled down dirt roads, mule hooves striking sparks on stone, and in small towns like Ashgrove, life carried on much as it had for generations. It was a time of transition and unease. The Civil War was 3 decades past, yet its shadow still lingered. Families bore scars both seen and unseen, widows with black shawls, veterans with hollow eyes, and graves fenced by rusted iron. The state government spoke of progress, of schools and industry, but in places like Ashgrove, progress felt like a distant echo. Here, the chapel was the heart. A plain wooden structure, its clapboards weathered grey, standing on a rise above the millstream. Villagers said its bell could be heard 3 miles off, calling both farmhands and mill girls to worship. The pews were narrow, the hymnals frayed, but each Sunday morning the building filled with voices. To the parishioners, it was more than wooden nails. It was safety, order in a world of change. Records from the Nashville Banner in the spring of that year describe Ashgrove in flattering terms. A flourishing village of some 200 souls, industrious and God-fearing, its chapel well-attended, its children sound in both spirit and learning. The article praised the Reverend Elias Wilkes for his tireless ministry. It noted that the parish school, held within the chapel walls, kept literacy rates high. Boys and girls alike could read scripture, copy psalms, and sing from memory. In a state where education often lagged behind, this was no small thing. Outsiders would have seen nothing amiss. A postcard town, tidy and devout, and yet, beneath the surface, there were murmurs. Old families whispered of land deeds signed in haste, of graves dug too shallow, of a sickness that had passed through a generation before, taking infants by the dozen. Memory clung to the soil, though newcomers seldom noticed. Every December, when frost silvered the fields, the chapel held its feast of St. Lucy. Children processed with candles, singing verses in voices high and bright, while mothers watched with pride. It was a tradition said to drive back darkness during the longest nights. That December of 1899 was no different. At least, on the surface, the children rehearsed their hymns, candles were readied, the ledger of names was prepared, so that none might be forgotten during the prayers. And yet years later, when that ledger was opened, the names of 12 children were gone. Ashgrove, as it stood in the waning light of the 19th century, seemed solid, respectable, God-fearing. But history has a way of deceiving. The records show only what was permitted to remain. What was erased is another matter. The county ledgers from 1898-1900, preserved in the Rutherford County Archives, still bear the ink stains of their clerks. In them Ashgrove appears as a footnote, a line of figures, population tutti frutti of families 47 children under 1563. It was a place barely worthy of census attention, yet the neat handwriting betrays the pride of order. Every name recorded, every acre taxed. But alongside these numbers in the margins, there are notes seldom quoted. Wid. Margaret Ellison, 3 children deceased, burial unpaid. Complaint of sickness near mill house, infants ill, no doctor called. The ink thins as if the hand that wrote it wished not to linger. The church minutes, recovered from the Tennessee Methodist Conference of 1899, tell a different tale. Reverend Elias Wilkes, 38, presided over the chapel with stern devotion. His entries are brief but loaded. March 11, 1899, attendance strong, children's choir near complete. Wilkes family donated new psalm book. July 4, 1899, hit oppressive. Infants Week, 2 burials this month, prayers spoken. October 29, 1899's rumors of unrest, outsiders whisper, children restless during lessons. By December his handwriting trembled. The last entry before silence, December 12, 1899, Lucy feast near, 12 chosen for candle procession, may the Lord watch. The Nashville American published a curious piece in early December, just weeks before the children vanished. The column praised Ashgrove's little ones for their piety. The parish of Ashgrove, though modest, produces among its youth a choir of surpassing sweetness. Voices of heaven itself might be heard in their chapel each Sunday morn. Visitors remarked upon their faces, pale though they be, shining with uncommon devotion. That sentence, pale though they be, feels heavier in hindsight, a hint few caught. Neighbors outside the village told another story, in oral accounts recorded decades later by the Works Progress Administration. Farmers spoke of the children rehearsing late into the night, their songs carrying across the fields like a warning. One man remembered, They sang too long and too soft, like they weren't meant to stop. My hound whimpered when he heard it, and I shut my window fast. The respectable image of Ashgrove at the turn of the century was one of devotion, order, and innocence. But beneath the ledgers and minutes, whispers persisted. Whispers no one dared write in the official record. The chapel's bell tower was said to toll at midnight when no hand pulled the rope. The soil around the foundation stayed damp even in high summer. And some mothers, it was said, grew pale at the thought of their children holding candles within those walls. Still, none turned away. The ritual was too sacred, too deeply woven into their lives. By December, 12 names were entered into the ledger of St. Lucy's feast. Those names would never be spoken again. The final days of December 1899 are etched faintly in surviving scraps. Letters, receipts, and testimony stitched together like a quilt too thin to cover the truth. A letter from Sarah Montgomery, mother of one of the chosen 12, survives only because it was tucked into a family Bible. Addressed to her sister in Nashville, it reads, "Elias says Lucy's light shall shine brighter this year, and the little ones carry it. They look wan, and I would keep Joseph home, but the town says all must give. The air is heavy, and my sleep is broken. I hear him singing when the night is still, though he is fast asleep beside me." The hymn she names was her 7-year-old boy. A receipt from Carter's General Store, dated December 10, 1899, lists the 12 beeswax candles, tall, hand-dipped. 12 lengths of white ribbon, 1 vial marked vial of myrrh. No one questioned the purchase then, yet the bookkeeper circled the number 12 each time it appeared, as though it pressed itself too firmly onto the page. The final eyewitness fragment comes from the schoolmaster, Jonathan Hayes, who later gave sworn testimony in Nashville during the inquest. His words were noted, but never printed in the press. The children walked 2 by 2 toward the chapel, white ribbons in their hair. Their faces were pale, their lips cracked with winter air. I swear each one looked not at their parents, but upward, as if something had already taken hold of them. And yet their voices, sweet God, they sang as if they knew the song was their last. By the eve of December 13th, the town gathered as it always had, parents smiling through unease, Reverend Wilkes clutching his trembling notes, candles waiting to be lit. The chapel stood serene against the Tennessee night. Its windows glowed faintly. The bell rope swayed in a windless air. 12 children stepped inside, the doors shut. And from that moment forward, no ledger, no diary, no voice of the living would ever tell of them again. The feast of St. Lucy fell on a Wednesday that year, December 13th, 1899. In Ashgrove, the date was not merely a Catholic observance, but a binding ritual older than the town itself. Mothers dressed their children in white. Fathers pressed their hats against their chests. The chapel bell was polished, its clapper said to bring blessings if rung at midnight. At dusk, the procession began. The 12 chosen children walked barefoot through the frozen soil, holding their beeswax candles. Their breaths came in white clouds, thin and uneven, yet they made no sound of complaint. The townsfolk stood hushed along the path, eyes fixed upon their small figures glowing against the deepening dark. Inside the chapel, Reverend Elias Wilkes stood ready at the altar. His face was pale, sweat breaking across his brow despite the cold air. The hymns began softly, then swelled. The children's voices, sweet and brittle, carried a strange cadence that unsettled even the most devout. It was not the Latin we knew, testified Jonathan Hayes, the schoolmaster, in his later deposition. It sounded older, heavier, like words pulled from beneath the earth. The candles flickered though the doors were shut tight. The air thickened. Some in the pews whispered that they smelled myrrh, acrid and sharp, though none saw the vial opened. Then came the first disturbance. The chapel bell tolled once, but no hand was on the rope. Children's voices wavered, yet they did not stop. Instead, they sang louder as if commanded. The parents shifted uneasily in the pews. One mother rose to go forward, but Reverend Wilkes raised his hand, forbidding her to approach. The choir 12 swayed in unison, candle flames bending sideways though no draft was felt. A second toll rang from the tower, louder, heavier, and the chapel doors groaned as if something pressed against them from within. The third toll of the bell came without warning, so violent that dust sifted from the rafters and candles shook in their holders. Several parents cried out, rising to their feet. Yet the 12 children did not move from the altar. Their faces were pale, eyes fixed upon some invisible point above the pulpit. Witnesses later swore that the air turned unnaturally cold, their breaths hanging thick though no window was open. The hymn, still rising from the children's throats, took on an inhuman edge. Stretched syllables, tones no child's lungs should sustain. Jonathan Hayes recalled, I clapped my hands over my ears, for their singing grew sharp, like knives. And yet, God help me, they smiled while they sang. Then the candles flared all at once, flames lengthening as though drawn upward. A sound like rushing wind filled the chapel, but not a single cloak stirred. And then, silence. 12 voices cut off together. 12 flames snuffed out, darkness. A woman screamed, breaking the stillness. Parents surged forward, pushing past Reverend Wilkes, who fell to his knees muttering broken prayers. The pews creaked, boots struck stone, hands reached for children. But the altar stood empty. The ribbons lay on the floor. The wax of 12 candles dripped onto the stone in long, thin trails. The children themselves were gone. The doors had never opened. The windows were unbroken. Not a single soul saw them leave. By dawn, the chapel was sealed by order of county men. Reverend Wilkes was taken to Nashville, incoherent and pale, repeating only, "Lucy's light, Lucy's light," until his voice failed. No bodies were found, no graves dug. The ledger of Ashgrove closed on 12 missing names, and so began a silence that has stretched more than a century. The first reports appeared in the Nashville American, dated December 15, 1899. The headline read, "Tragedy in Ashgrove, 12 young lost in sudden fire." According to this article, the children perished when a lamp overturned during rehearsal, igniting the choir robes. The chapel, however, bore no signs of burning. Not a beam blackened, not a pane cracked. Still, the newspaper insisted, the flames consumed swiftly and left no trace. A divine judgment, perhaps too swift for mortal eyes. Locals scoffed. They had been present that night. They knew no fire had ever touched the stone walls. The county coroner's notes offer another story. His ledger, still archived in Murfreesboro, contains only a short entry, no remains, no evidence of flame. Cause of absence unexplained, Reverend Wilkes unfit for testimony. Instead of closure, the official record preserved only emptiness. Oral accounts gathered years later by the Works Progress Administration contradict both. Elderly residents told interviewers that the chapel had become strange long before the disappearance. One farmer's widow said, "They sang the devil's tongue, and it weren't no hymn. I saw their mouths move, but the sound came from above us, from the rafters. My husband dragged me out, and I never stepped foot there again." A different witness, the blacksmith Amos Drew, claimed to see light bursting from the windows. It were like the whole place filled with sun, but it was midnight. The glass near split, but then it went dark as coal. When we rushed in, the children was gone. Theories spread. Some whispered of mass abduction, suggesting a wagon waited in the woods. Others swore of ritual offering, Reverend Wilkes painted as a man in thrall to hidden texts. Yet none could answer the simplest question, how 12 children vanished without a single footprint, scream, or splintered door. By January 1900, rumor had overtaken record. Competing stories multiplied, each one more unsettling than the last. Some townsfolk swore the children had been taken underground, swallowed by the very stone. They pointed to the chapel's foundation, which rested on old limestone riddled with caves. The earth took them back. One miner insisted, though no passage was ever found. Others whispered of the Lucia candle ritual, an obscure rite once practiced in Scandinavian settlements. In these ceremonies, a procession of children carried candles into the night, symbolizing purity. But in corrupted form, some said, the ritual became an offering. The flame was not meant to guide the children but consumed them. The most disturbing fragments came from Reverend Elias Wilkes himself. When detained in Nashville, he scribbled pages in a trembling hand, scraps now preserved in the Tennessee Historical Society. One reads only, "Lucy sees. Lucy chooses. I could not stop her. I could not." Another, "The light asked for 12. I gave them. They are not gone, only waiting in her chamber of brightness." Doctors dismissed these as the ravings of a broken man, but the villagers remembered how steady his voice had been at the altar, until the moment the children disappeared. By spring of 1900, 3 separate narratives coexisted in uneasy silence: the official story, a fire too swift to leave traces; the rational theory, a disappearance, perhaps abduction concealed by Wilkes; the forbidden whisper, that St. Lucy's feast had been twisted into something else, and the children were claimed by it. Each account undermined the others. Each left holes too wide to bridge, and so no answer was accepted. Only silence remained, heavy as stone. By 1902, the chapel of Ashgrove had been abandoned. Ivy crept up its stone walls, its bell rope cut and left to rot. Travelers passing through Rutherford County often remarked that the building appeared intact, yet no birds nested in its eaves, no wildflowers grew near its threshold. Locals avoided it. Some swore they still heard children's voices in the night, soft, weaving harmonies, as though a choir still practiced within. Others claimed to glimpse pale figures through the windows, 12 small forms holding candles that burned without smoke. In 1915, an effort was made to demolish the chapel. Workmen refused to continue after the first day. One recounted, "We broke the stone near the altar, and it bled dark water. My boots near filled with it. We left and never returned. The chapel remained standing. Oral tradition carried the tale forward." During the Great Depression, WPA folklorists catalogued the story as one of Tennessee's unresolved vanishings. Their notes include a chilling proverb that locals muttered, "If the bell tolls 3, the children sing free." Even into the mid-20th century, parents in neighboring towns warned their children, "Stay away from Ashgrove after dark, or Lucy will light your candle too." But the strangest part lies not in folklore, but in documents discovered much later. In 1967, a historian cataloguing diocesan records stumbled upon a second ledger of Reverend Wilkes. Hidden within was a final entry, written in a jagged hand, undated. "They walk still, their hymn is unfinished, and until it ends, none shall rest." By the late 20th century, the chapel had collapsed into ruin. Only the bell tower remained upright, its iron tongue rusted. Yet, on certain nights, travelers swore they heard it toll. 3 slow peals, always 3. Local archivists, when pressed, admit that records of the 12 children's families grow oddly inconsistent after 1899. Names misspelled, dates crossed out, census entries erased as though by deliberate hand, as if the children had never been born at all. And yet their photographs remain. Small, stiff portraits in oval frames, tucked away in attics and county records. Each face blurred slightly, each pair of eyes fixed not at the camera, but somewhere beyond. What became of them? Were they taken by fever, by fire, by the hand of their pastor? Or, as the whispers insist, did they never leave at all? The ruin still stands in Rutherford County. The stones are half buried, the tower leaning, but the ground is soft beneath your step. Too soft. Some say you can still see 12 impressions in the earth if you walk the site under a new moon. Small feet marching in a circle. And so the story lingers. A hymn without end. A mystery without answer. If you doubt it, the archives remain open. The county courthouse still keeps Wilkes's ledger under glass. His last words etched in trembling ink, "They walk still." Their hymn is unfinished. So ask yourself, if the bell tolls 3 tonight, will you listen for the children's song?